the craziest ancient attempts at human flight in history. Humans have always looked at birds the way broke people look at luxury cars, with a deep personal conviction that they could make it work. Some of them actually tried. There's a crater on the moon named after Abbas Ibn Firnas. There's a statue of him outside Baghdad International Airport. His face has been on an Algerian banknote. The man is genuinely celebrated across the Arab world as a pioneer of aviation. He was also about 65 years old when he did it, which the monuments tend to leave out. Ibn Firnas was a 9th century Andalusian polymath living in Cordoba. Musician, poet, astronomer, engineer, inventor of corrective lenses, designer of a mechanical planetarium. The kind of person who, if you met him at a party, would make you feel bad about yourself within 3 minutes. In 875 AD, he built a glider out of silk, feathers, and wooden frames and threw himself off a hill outside Cordoba. And he actually flew. Stayed airborne long enough that the crowd watching started to genuinely panic. Because it was 875 AD and an elderly man was in the sky. The landing destroyed his back. He never fully recovered. He spent the rest of his life insisting the whole thing would have worked perfectly if he'd just watched how birds tucked their tails on the way down before attempting it. His contemporaries noted, not unkindly, that this was the sort of thing you probably should have figured out before the hill. He was right though. That was exactly the problem, which somehow makes it worse. Hezarfen Ahmed Çelebi gets exiled to Algeria at the end of this story, so keep that in mind. It's 1632 Constantinople. Hezarfen has spent years studying Leonardo da Vinci's unpublished notes on flight. A man who sketched flying machines and sensibly never built any of them, and has been quietly practicing glides off the Ahmedana hill with artificial wings. Between 6 and 9 test runs, depending on the source. The man did his homework. Sultan Murad IV got wind of it and wanted a demonstration. So Hezarfen climbed the Galata Tower, 67 meters above the city, strapped on his wings, and in front of the Sultan and what was presumably a very nervous crowd, jumped. He caught the Bosphorus winds and glided roughly 3 kilometers across the strait, landing in Doğancular Square in Üsküdar. Clean, controlled. The first person in recorded history to successfully fly across a body of water. Murad threw him a bag of gold on the spot. Then, apparently after thinking it over for a moment, remarked that this was the kind of man who could do anything he set his mind to, and that this was not entirely a comfortable thing for a sultan to have living nearby. Algeria. Hezarfen died there. Hezarfen's brother Lagari Hasan Çelebi looked at human flight and thought, needs more gunpowder. In 1633, to celebrate the birth of Sultan Murad IV's daughter. And I cannot stress enough what a choice this is as a celebratory gesture. Lagari packed himself into a 7-winged rocket contraption stuffed with about 50 kilograms of gunpowder, lit the fuse, and blasted himself roughly 300 meters into the air over the Bosphorus. The man turned himself into a human rocket using 17th century technology. And it worked. The fuel burned out. He deployed his wings, glided back down toward the water, and landed safely enough to swim ashore. He reportedly shouted something at the Sultan on his way up. We don't know exactly what, but the image of a man screaming into the sky while riding a gunpowder explosion is pretty self-explanatory. Sultan Murad was delighted, gave Lagari gold and a position in the Ottoman cavalry. Compare this to Hezarfen. who glided silently and elegantly across the Bosphorus and got exiled to Algeria. Lagari blew himself into the stratosphere on a barely controlled explosion, swam back to shore, and got a promotion. The lesson here is unclear, but feels important. Here's everything you need to know about John Damian. He was an Italian alchemist living in Scotland. He had talked his way into becoming the Abbot of Tunglen despite having no theological background whatsoever. And his plan was to fly from Stirling Castle to France. Not the courtyard, France. Nobody stopped him. That's the part that lingers. There were people present, but the king was there. James IV of Scotland, a reasonably intelligent man by all accounts. Watch John Damian attach wings to himself, climb to the top of the castle battlements, and launch himself toward France. He came down almost immediately into a dung heap at the base of the castle walls and broke his thigh bone. Stirling to the dung heap. That was the full extent of the journey. Now, the normal response here is to feel some embarrassment, assess what went wrong structurally, maybe quietly retire from aviation. Damian did none of that. He announced that the problem was the chicken feathers. Chickens, he explained, are earthly creatures with an earthly nature, and their feathers therefore carry an innate gravitational sympathy toward the ground, specifically toward dung, where chickens tend to spend their time. The wings had not failed. The wings had simply behaved like chickens. Eagle feathers, he maintained, would have carried him to France. King James did not commission eagle feathers. He also did not strip Damian of the abbotship, which says something, though it's not clear what. Eilmer of Malmesbury broke both his legs in the year 1010 and spent the rest of his life furious about the wrong thing. He'd built wings, climbed Malmesbury Abbey Tower, jumped, and glided about 200 meters before the landing ended his flying career and both his tibias simultaneously. A Benedictine monk, the year 1010, 200 meters. While being carried away from the wreckage of his own body, Eilmer apparently worked out the problem. No tail on the wings. That was it. The stabilization issue was solvable. He told his abbot he wanted to try again with the revised design. The abbot said no, and then, apparently not trusting Eilmer's commitment to that answer, formally banned him from attempting it ever again. Eilmer is described in the sources as having accepted this with some bitterness. Not about the legs, about the tail. He knew it would have worked. He just never got to prove it. 135 years later, Abbas Ibn Firnas' biographers would note that Ibn Firnas had also failed to account for the tail mechanism. Two men on opposite sides of the Mediterranean, a century apart, with no knowledge of each other, made the exact same mistake and the exact same diagnosis afterward. Neither got a second attempt. The Wright brothers added a tail. They didn't mention either of them.